If you want to get Nero Wolfe's undivided attention at 11 in the morning, you have exactly two options. Interfere with his orchids, or interfere with his assumption that the world will leave him alone. On that particular Tuesday in October, someone had chosen the second method, and they'd done it with a music box. I was reconciling the monthly accounts when the melody started. Not from upstairs where Wolfe conducts his daily communion with the Cattleyas and Phalaenopsis, but from somewhere much closer. A thin mechanical waltz was drifting from the front hall, the kind of tune that belongs in a jewelry box or a child's bedroom, not in the dignified confines of the brownstone on West 35th Street. The source sat on the small table near the coat closet, a mahogany music box about the size of a thick book, with brass fittings that had been polished by careful hands and time. The lid was open, revealing the usual tiny ballerina frozen mid-pirouette, but this one wore a dress of faded blue silk instead of the traditional pink. Someone had left it there while I was upstairs getting dressed, which meant they'd either picked our supposedly unpickable lock or possessed a key that predated our tenancy. The tune wound down just as Fritz appeared from the kitchen, wiping flour from his hands and wearing the expression of a man who'd heard music where no music should be. "Archie, I did not." "I know, Fritz. You didn't let anyone in, and you didn't wind up any music boxes." We both regarded the thing as if it might sprout legs and dance away. The mechanism had stopped, but something about its presence felt deliberate, purposeful, like a calling card left by someone who understood the value of making an impression. At precisely 11 o'clock, the elevator descended from the plant rooms with its familiar wheeze and thump. Wolfe emerged and made his way to the office with the measured tread of a man whose schedule is sacred and whose tolerance for disruption hovers somewhere between minimal and non-existent. He settled into his custom-made chair, the only piece of furniture in Manhattan designed to accommodate a seventh of a ton of detective, and picked up the morning mail. "Fritz mentioned music," he said without looking up. "Trust it was not an invitation to dance. More like an invitation to think. We have a visitor's calling card in the hall and it plays the Blue Danube." That made him look up. Wolfe has particular opinions about Strauss waltzes, most of them favorable. Indeed, a music box, antique, expensive, and delivered by someone with either exceptional lock-picking skills or a key to our front door. He set down the mail and leaned back, which in Wolfe's case involves a complex redistribution of mass that would challenge a civil engineer. "Bring it here." I fetched the music box, handling it with the care due to evidence or explosives. Wolfe examined it with the same methodical attention he gives to a new orchid hybrid, turning it over in his hands and studying the brass mechanism visible through the open lid. "Swiss," he observed. "Late 19th century. The case has been refinished, but the works are original." He wound the key on the side and set the ballerina spinning. The waltz began again, sweet and precise, each note falling exactly where Strauss had intended it. But something was wrong. I've heard the Blue Danube enough times to know when it's being played correctly, and this wasn't. There were gaps, deliberate pauses where notes should have been, spaces in the melody that felt intentional rather than mechanical. The silences weren't random. They had a pattern, a rhythm of their own that seemed to comment on the music around them. When the tune finished, Wolfe wound it again and listened with the focused attention he usually reserves for Fritz's soufflés. This time I heard it too. 3 short gaps, then 2 longer ones, then a space that lasted almost a full measure before the melody resumed. "Code," I said. "Arrangement," he corrected. Whether of information or mere mischief remains to be determined. The doorbell rang. Through the one-way glass panel, I could see a woman in her 40s standing on our stoop. She wore a charcoal gray suit that had been tailored by someone who understood the difference between expensive and merely costly, and she carried herself with the kind of rigid composure that comes from years of being the smartest person in most rooms. Her dark hair was pulled back in a style that emphasized the sharp intelligence in her eyes, and she clutched a leather portfolio against her chest like armor. I opened the door. "Miss, Dr. Catherine Morse." Her voice had the precise diction of someone accustomed to being quoted accurately. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." She glanced past me toward the office. Or rather, something that was taken from me and left here as a message I'm meant to understand. The music box. Yes. She stepped past me into the hall without being invited, which took nerve considering my size and the general atmosphere of the brownstone, which tends to discourage uninvited intimacy. I apologize for the unconventional delivery, Mr. Goodwin, but I needed to ensure you would see me. And I needed Mr. Wolfe to hear what that box has to say. Lady, breaking into someone's house isn't unconventional. It's illegal. She had the grace to look embarrassed. I didn't break in. I have a key. She opened her portfolio and produced a brass key that looked old enough to have unlocked Bonaparte's diary. This brownstone belonged to my grandmother, Millicent Vance. She died in 1987 and left it to a nephew who sold it to Mr. Wolfe. But she gave me this key years before that, along with specific instructions about when to use it. That explained the how, but not the why. So you decided to take a nostalgic tour of Grandma's old place and leave a music box as a memento. Not exactly. She was looking toward the office now, and something in her expression had shifted from embarrassment to something that might have been desperation. "Mr. Goodwin, I need to speak with Nero Wolfe. I need to hire him to prevent a murder." "Whose murder?" "Mine." She straightened her shoulders and met my eyes. "Someone has been systematically destroying my professional reputation, my personal relationships, and my sense of security. They've made it clear that the final step in their plan involves making me disappear permanently. That music box contains evidence of who's behind it. Evidence that was hidden by my grandmother 30 years ago and has been waiting for the right moment to be heard." The elevator descended again. Wolfe, returning from wherever he'd gone to escape the sound of conversation in his front hall. He appeared in the office doorway, took in the scene with a single, comprehensive glance, and sighed. "Dr. Morse," he said, "I assume you are the composer of this morning's musical interlude." "I am. And I'm prepared to pay you $50,000 to listen to what that music box is really trying to tell you." Wolfe's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch, which for him constitutes visible surprise. "Indeed. Archie, escort Dr. Morse to the office and bring the music box." In the red leather chair, Dr. Morse sat with the careful posture of someone who'd learned that relaxation could be mistaken for weakness. She placed her portfolio on her lap and folded her hands over it, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes kept darting to the music box on Wolfe's desk. "Dr. Morse," Wolfe began, settling into his chair with the deliberate care of a man who knows that once seated, he won't be moving again for some time. "You mentioned evidence hidden by your grandmother. Explain." "My grandmother was Millicent Vance. You may have heard of her. She was a musicologist, a collector of mechanical instruments, and a woman who believed that the most important secrets should be hidden in plain sight." Dr. Morse opened her portfolio and withdrew a yellowed letter. "Before she died, she left me this, along with instructions that I was to bring it to whoever lived in this house if I ever found myself in mortal danger from someone whose identity I couldn't prove." She handed Wolfe the letter. He read it slowly, his expression giving away nothing, then set it on his desk and picked up the music box. "Your grandmother embedded information in the mechanism," he said. It wasn't a question. She was a pioneer in what she called acoustic cryptography, the art of hiding messages in musical arrangements. That music box doesn't just play the Blue Danube. It plays a recording of a conversation that took place in this very room 30 years ago, a conversation that proves who killed my parents. Wolfe wound the music box again and listened to the gaps in the melody with new attention. "Your parents were murdered. The police said it was a car accident. My grandmother knew better. She was here, in this house, when the man responsible confessed to someone he thought he could trust. She recorded it using a technique she developed for preserving folk songs, then hid the recording in the one place no one would think to look, inside a child's toy. And now someone knows what the music box contains. Someone has always known. They've been watching me, waiting for the right moment to act. 3 weeks ago, my grandmother's house was burglarized. Nothing valuable was taken, but her workshop was destroyed. 2 weeks ago, I received a series of anonymous letters suggesting that my research into historical musical instruments was based on fraudulent sources. Last week, my apartment was broken into, and yesterday, she paused, swallowed hard. Yesterday, I found a dead cat on my doorstep, with a note tied around its neck. The note said, "Some secrets should stay buried." Wolfe set down the music box and regarded Dr. Morse with the steady attention he usually reserved for a particularly challenging crossword puzzle. "The fee you mentioned, $50,000. To find the person who killed my parents and wants to kill me. To make sure the evidence in that music box is heard by the right people and to keep me alive long enough to see justice done. My fee is $25,000, plus expenses. Then you'll take the case?" Wolfe was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from Dr. Morse to the music box, to the letter on his desk. Finally, he nodded once. "I will investigate the contents of this device and the threats against your person. However, I have conditions. You will answer all my questions completely and truthfully. You will provide me with all materials related to your grandmother's work and your parents' death. And you will remain in this house, under my protection, until the matter is resolved." "Thank you." For the first time since she'd arrived, some of the rigidity went out of Dr. Morse's posture. "You don't know what this means to me." "I know exactly what it means," Wolfe said quietly. "It means that someone has made the mistake of using my former home as a stage for murder and using a work of art as a weapon. Both are offenses I take personally." He picked up the music box one more time and wound it slowly, listening to the coded gaps in the melody with the focused attention of a man who just accepted a challenge he intended to win. "Archie," he said without looking up, "call Saul Panzer. Tell him we have work for him. And Fritz," he raised his voice slightly, "we'll be having a guest for dinner. Set an extra place." As the music box played its interrupted waltz, I had the feeling that this case was going to be about more than just solving a 30-year-old murder. Someone had violated the sanctity of the brownstone, turned a child's toy into an instrument of terror, and threatened a woman whose only crime was seeking the truth about her parents' death. They had, in short, made it personal. And when Nero Wolfe takes something personally, the outcome is rarely in doubt, only the method by which justice will be served. The witness in the music box had been waiting 30 years to tell its story. Now finally, it was going to have its day in court. If you want to know what disturbed looks like at our address, it isn't sirens or screaming. It's Fritz placing a tray on the office stand without his usual geometric precision. It's Wolfe's lips tightening a 1/16 of an inch when a stranger's handbag brushes the leg of the red leather chair. It's the music box playing its interrupted waltz into a room that has heard everything from police bluster to a client's sobs and never had a ballerina for a stenographer. By noon, we had Dr. Catherine Morse relocated from the reception chair to the reed one, with her portfolio parked on the stand where a decanter sometimes rests. Wolfe had declared the front bedroom adequate, which in his lexicon is how you describe fireworks when they're happening in someone else's city. I had moved her upstairs to clear a dresser drawer and, on Wolfe's orders, sequestered her phone. "Not confiscated," he corrected when she looked alarmed. "Sequestered. Dr. Morse, any call you wish to make will be placed through Mr. Goodwin. Any call you receive will be answered by him. That is for your safety and mine." She didn't argue, which scored her a point, but I would need more than obedience to stop wondering if I'd just set a cat among pigeons and told the cat to sleep in the spare room. The letter from Millicent Vance lay open on Wolfe's desk, its paper browned at the edges like a pastry left too long in the oven. The sentence that mattered most ran, "To recover what he confessed, count the silences, not the song. 5 kinds of absence spell the name he used to hide his crime." A note in the margin added, "Remember Vienna. Use the ballroom, not the street." Wolfe was conducting his 3rd examination of the music box when the doorbell announced our first official disruption. Through the one-way glass, I could see a woman in a color that had cost money to invent and a man with a jaw aimed like a bulldozer blade. "Mr. Goodwin," the woman said when I opened the door. "I'm Lila Baird, director of the Vance Foundation." She handed me a card that proved it in gilt you could shave with. "This is Trevor Phelps, counsel. We understand Dr. Catherine Morse is here, and that an item belonging to the Foundation's collection is in your possession." Behind them, a town car idled, shedding quiet arrogance onto West 35th Street. "Possession is an interesting word," I told her. "Like neighbor, means what you want until somebody startles your fence." "Mr. Goodwin," she said, the greeting flavor gone, "we request immediate return of the Vance music box. It's catalogued as VF32, Blue Danube, Swiss, circa 1890. It was unlawfully removed from Foundation Holdings. Come in and lay your tail on the line." They crossed into the hall on shoes that had never met a puddle. I took them to the office and gave them the seating chart. Baird in the yellow chair, Phelps on the client chair opposite, which he took as if it were a witness stand that owed him money. Wolfe regarded them with the steady attention he usually reserves for a crossword puzzle that's fighting back. "Mr. Phelps, you may proceed with your speech." Phelps unbuttoned his jacket to free a file. "We're here to retrieve property. We can resolve this informally. If not," Wolfe said mildly, "you will write letters, and a judge will be asked to decide whether an object left on my table by its possessor became my bailment. Meanwhile, you will not remove so much as a screw." Baird leaned forward. "That box belongs to the Foundation. Millicent Vance deeded it to us with the rest of her mechanical instruments." Dr. Morse, who had been listening from the red chair with the composure of someone accustomed to academic warfare, spoke quietly. "The box was given to me by Millicent with explicit instructions, in writing, to retain personal custody in the event of danger. The deed excluded personal research materials. VF32 was accessioned and insured by us," Phelps said. "We're not here to argue catalogs, but we will if we must." "Pfui." Wolfe let it out like steam from a kettle just off boil. "You are here to learn whether its contents are to be broadcast, and you have, in your speed, demonstrated your interest." "Contents?" Phelps' voice climbed half an octave. Wolfe settled more fully into his chair, a move that broadened his base of operations. "A music box may contain music. It may also contain other things. In this case, the absences, silences, carry information. Your haste confirms that you know its importance." Baird's gaze cut to the box on Wolfe's desk, and I caught the way her eyes measured the desk-to-door route. Phelps had measured me. Both calculations ended where they always do in our office, with the furniture playing for our team. "We will not be parting with the box," Wolfe declared. "Not today, not tomorrow, possibly not at all. If you wish to test ownership, engage counsel more competent than Mr. Phelps." When I showed them out, Phelps paused at the hall table where the old brass key rested. "Antique hardware," he observed. "It keeps better time than some lawyers," I told him and shut the door. Back in the office, the phone rang. I answered it, expecting perhaps Inspector Kramer or Saul Panzer. Instead, I got silence, then a dial tone. 5 minutes later, it rang again. Same result. "Archie." Wolfe's voice carried his particular note of irritation reserved for interruptions during his reading period. "The telephone." The third time, a voice responded. A man's voice, carefully modulated to avoid any identifying characteristics. Mr. Goodwin, I believe you have something that doesn't belong to you. We have lots of things that don't belong to us. Books from the library, unpaid bills, a general sense of optimism about human nature. You'll have to be more specific. The woman. And what she brought with her. Sorry, wrong number. We're not running a boarding house or a pawn shop. Mr. Goodwin, the voice had acquired an edge, like a blade being sharpened. Some conversations are better conducted in person. Tomorrow evening, 8 o'clock, the conservatory garden in Central Park, near the fountain. Dr. Morse comes alone, brings the music box and any other materials, and walks away with her life. And if she declines this generous offer, then her academic life will come to an abrupt and permanent end. As will yours, Mr. Goodwin, and Mr. Wolfe's, and anyone else who gets in the way. I looked toward Wolfe, who had been listening with the focused attention of a cat watching a mouse hole. He made a small gesture. Continue. I'll pass along the message. See that you do, and remember, some secrets are worth killing for. The line went dead. Dr. Morse had gone very still in the red chair. They found me. They found you yesterday, Wolfe said calmly. Today, they overplayed their hand. He picked up the music box and wound it slowly, listening to the interrupted melody with new attention. Your grandmother's acoustic cryptography, Dr. Morse. The treatise you mentioned, I shall require the relevant sections. She believed that any structured sequence could be imbued with additional layers of meaning, Dr. Morse explained, her voice gaining academic animation despite the circumstances. She even wrote extensively about it, though it was never formally published. Too avant-garde for the musicological establishment. And this particular arrangement, she said it contained a truth that would one day be vital for me, that the witness would speak when I was ready to listen. Wolfe wound the music box again, and as the ballerina twirled through her interrupted dance, I could hear what he was hearing. 3 short gaps, 2 longer ones, then a space that lasted almost a full measure. The silences weren't random. They had their own rhythm, their own meaning. Archie, Wolfe said, his eyes still on the spinning figure. Call Saul Panzer. Tell him to be here at 6 o'clock. I want surveillance on this house, background on our Foundation visitors, and the provenance of that brass key. Also inform Inspector Kramer that we may require his services tomorrow evening. You're not seriously considering, Dr. Morse began. I'm considering several things, none of them involving surrender to threats or abandonment of evidence. Wolfe closed the music box with a decisive snap. Your grandmother went to considerable trouble to preserve the truth. Tomorrow evening, we're going to make sure it gets heard. As the brownstone settled into its new reality, part sanctuary, part fortress, part stage for a 30-year-old drama, finally reaching its climax, I had the distinct feeling that we were about to discover just how far someone was willing to go to keep certain secrets buried. The witness in the music box had been patient for 3 decades. Now, it seemed, everyone was in a hurry to hear what it had to say. The beauty of a proper investigation, according to Nero Wolfe, lies not in chasing facts, but in arranging for facts to present themselves in orderly fashion. By Wednesday afternoon, with Dr. Catherine Morse safely installed in the guest room and the music box locked in Wolfe's safe, we had begun the delicate process of drawing our circle. Saul Panzer arrived at 4 o'clock sharp, carrying the autumn air on his coat and that particular expression of controlled satisfaction that means he's been earning his fee. Saul doesn't waste words, which makes him invaluable in a business where most people use 12 syllables to express what could be said with 3. The Foundation first, he said, settling into the yellow chair with his notebook. Lila Baird, age 42, has been director for 8 years. Before that, assistant curator at the Metropolitan Museum, where she resigned under circumstances involving questionable acquisition practices. The Foundation pays her $200,000 annually, plus a Manhattan apartment and Hampton's house. Dr. Morse shifted in the red leather chair. I had no idea the compensation was so generous. Trevor Phelps, Saul continued, 38, Harvard Law, specializes in cultural property law. His firm has represented the foundation since its inception, but also handles private collectors who prefer anonymity. Lives in a Tribeca loft, worth more than most people's life savings. Wolfe made a small sound that might have been interest or indigestion. The foundation's financial health? Complicated. Established in 1988 with a $3 million endowment. Current assets, $12 million. But they've been deaccessioning items at an unusual rate. Over 200 pieces in 5 years, all to private collectors, all at prices well above appraised values. That's impossible, Dr. Morse said. The Foundation Charter specifically prohibits breaking up the collection. Charters can be amended, I observed, especially when $12 million is involved. Saul flipped a page. Which brings us to Dr. Marcus Webb, age 55. He was Millicent Vance's research assistant in the 1980s and is now the Foundation's chief acquisitions specialist. He handles all the buying and selling. The name hit Dr. Morse like a slap. Marcus, but he was devoted to my grandmother's work. He believed her acoustic cryptography theories could revolutionize musicology. Devoted enough to profit from them, Saul said quietly. He's acquired a reputation among collectors as the man who can authenticate or question the provenance of mechanical instruments. His opinion can make or break a sale. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, a movement that involved the same careful engineering as raising a drawbridge. Dr. Webb knew about the recording capabilities. If anyone did, he would, Dr. Morse said slowly. He was present for most of my grandmother's experiments. He even helped her design some of the mechanisms. The doorbell interrupted, and through the one-way glass I could see our first visitor, a man in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of suit that announces its price without vulgarity. His handshake was firm but brief, the grip of someone who makes quick assessments and acts on them. Dr. Marcus Webb, he said. I understand there's been some confusion about Foundation property. In the office, Webb took the yellow chair and immediately focused on Wolfe's desk, though the music box was no longer visible. His eyes had the particular intensity of someone looking for something specific. The F-32, he said quietly. I catalogued it myself in 1988. Millicent was so excited about that piece. She said it represented a breakthrough in her research. What kind of breakthrough? Wolfe asked. Webb's gaze shifted to Dr. Morse, and his expression softened with what might have been genuine affection. Catherine, you look so much like her. Your grandmother, I mean. The same way of listening with your whole attention. Dr. Webb, Wolfe interjected with the particular note that means the conversation will proceed along his chosen route. The breakthrough. She believed she'd found a way to embed complex information in mechanical musical arrangements. Not simple codes, but entire conversations, preserved in the gaps and variations of the melody. Webb paused, his fingers drumming against the chair arm. She was working on a paper about it when she died. What happened to her research? The Foundation acquired everything. Standard practice for academic estates. His voice carried a slight defensive edge. Including detailed notes on the acoustic cryptography project. Wolfe was quiet for a moment, studying Webb with the steady attention he usually reserves for a crossword puzzle that's fighting back. You were present at Mrs. Vance's musicales. Every month for 3 years. She hosted them here in this very room. Collectors, scholars, donors, anyone interested in mechanical music. Webb's eyes grew distant. She called them her salons of sound. People would bring instruments, share discoveries, argue about attribution and technique. Who attended regularly? Webb's expression grew cautious. Well, there was Dr. Alistair Finch from Columbia. He was always skeptical of Millicent's more innovative theories. Julian Thorne, the art dealer, was a frequent guest. He's chairman of our board now, and Madame Evangeline Dubois, though she and Millicent had a rather contentious relationship. Dr. Morse leaned forward. Contentious how? Professional jealousy, mostly. Madame Dubois is a serious collector, but she lacks academic credentials. She resented Millicent's scholarly authority. Webb paused. There was also an incident involving a celestial globe automaton that Madame Dubois claimed Millicent had promised to sell her. And Lawrence Vance? Wolfe asked. Webb's mouth tightened. Millicent's nephew. He attended occasionally, usually when he needed money. Millicent tolerated him, but barely. She once told me he had the soul of an auctioneer and the ethics of a pickpocket. After Webb left, with promises to provide a complete list of musicale attendees, Wolfe sat in contemplative silence while I made notes. The circle was taking shape. Foundation insiders with financial motives, academic rivals with professional grudges, collectors with personal vendettas, and family members with inheritance grievances. "Archie," Wolfe said finally, "call Dr. Finch at Columbia. Tell him we require 20 minutes of his time tomorrow at 2 o'clock to discuss his former colleague's research methods." I reached Finch's office and got the man himself, a voice that managed to sound pompous, even saying hello. "Mr. Goodwin, I'm a dean now, not some graduate student to be summoned at will." "Dean Finch, we're investigating threats against Dr. Catherine Morse. Your name has come up in connection with her parents' work." The pomposity deflated slightly. "Threats? What sort of threats?" "The sort that end with people dead. Tomorrow at 2. "Very well. But I won't have my reputation impugned by association with that family's melodrama." Next, Julian Thorne's gallery. His assistant informed me he was traveling on urgent business. But when I mentioned Nero Wolfe and a certain music box, Thorne himself came on the line within minutes. "Mr. Goodwin." His voice had the warm authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. "Anything for Mr. Wolfe. I can be there at 4 tomorrow." Madame Evangeline Dubois proved more challenging. Her secretary spoke with a French accent that could have cut glass and an attitude that suggested I was interrupting something far more important than mere conversation. But when I mentioned the Vance collection and hinted at irregularities in recent sales, Madame Dubois herself picked up. "Mr. Goodwin," she said in English, only slightly touched by her native accent, "if this concerns Millicent Vance's collection, I have been waiting 30 years for someone to ask the right questions. Tomorrow at 5. Lawrence Vance was the easiest to reach and the hardest to pin down. He answered from what sounded like a bar, with ice clinking and conversation buzzing in the background. "Archie Goodwin, I've heard so much about you." His voice carried the particular joviality of someone who'd started drinking before lunch. "If this is about Cousin Catherine's little adventure, I'm afraid I can't help much. Ancient history, you know." "Ancient history has a way of becoming current events," I told him. "Tomorrow at 6. "Well, if you insist, but I won't have my good name dragged through whatever mess Catherine has stirred up." By evening, we had our appointments scheduled and our circle drawn. 5 suspects, each with motive, means, and opportunity to want the music box silenced. 5 people who had moved through Millicent Vance's world and might have heard or said something that could destroy them 30 years later. Wolfe closed his notebook with the satisfaction of a man who prefers his prey prearranged. "Dr. Morse," he said, "tomorrow you will remain here while Archie and I conduct interviews. You will prepare for me a complete list of your grandmother's musical attendees from 1985 to 1987, with particular attention to anyone who possessed keys to this house." "And the meeting at the conservatory garden?" she asked. "We will not deliver you to blackmailers," Wolfe said firmly. "We will deliver them a situation they cannot control." He picked up a book, something thick and German about orchid cultivation, and settled in for his evening reading. But I noticed his eyes weren't moving across the page. He was thinking, processing the information we'd gathered, arranging the pieces of a puzzle that had been 30 years in the making. The witness in the music box had kept its secrets through 3 decades of silence. Tomorrow, we would begin the process of making it sing. Wolfe's idea of a field kit is an index card. He handed me one at 11, creamstock, his script neat enough to shame printing presses. It read, "Keys. Who held them, when, copies made. VF32, first knowledge, last sighting, modifications. Musical attendees, frequency, quarrels, notable absences, deaccessions, rationale, beneficiaries, timing, acoustic cryptography, believers versus skeptics, parents, accident, any expressed doubts." Under that, a final line, "Notice dissonances, not harmonies." I tucked it in my breast pocket with the 38 and my better nature, and set out into the kind of October morning that makes you forget why anyone complains about New York weather. The academic Fortress Columbia at 2 meant navigating a lobby that smelled like endowment funds and floor wax. Dean Alistair Finch's office occupied a corner that probably cost more to heat than most people's annual rent, with leather-bound volumes arranged like soldiers, and a portrait of himself that suggested the artist had been paid by the compliment. Finch wore a tie the color of old money and a smile calibrated for donor dinners. "Mr. Goodwin, 20 minutes, he said, making the number sound like a gift to posterity. "Dr. Millicent Vance," I began. He sighed with the practiced weariness of a man who'd spent decades explaining why other people were wrong. A brilliant amateur with regrettable enthusiasms, she collected wonderfully and theorized disastrously. Acoustic cryptography, indeed, codes hidden in waltzes. It would be charming if it weren't so academically irresponsible. "You attended her musicales?" "Occasionally." His smile held firm as concrete. "Out of collegial courtesy." "Dr. Webb says you were a regular for 3 years." Something flickered behind his eyes. Irritation, maybe, or calculation. Marcus remembers selectively. Those evenings were social occasions. Sherry, canapes, people treating mechanical toys as if they were Stradivari. Hardly serious scholarship. "You remember VF32, the blue Danube box with the ballerina?" He opened his mouth, closed it, and picked an invisible speck from his cuff. "If you mean the Swiss mahogany piece with the unfortunate dancer in blue silk, then yes. Difficult to forget. Millicent was obsessed with it, claimed it contained a conversation. Pure fantasy, of course. Yet you recall the catalog number and the dress color." He didn't blink, but his fingers tightened on his pen. "I chair 3 committees that deal with cataloging. Numbers and details stick. As for Dr. Morse's parents, a tragedy. 2 promising scholars who confused showmanship with substance. Their automobile went off the Taconic Parkway. The grief rippled through the entire department." "Anyone ever suggest it wasn't an accident?" "I deal in evidence, Mr. Goodwin, not family melodrama." But as I prepared to leave, I noticed something on his credenza. A bronze music stand decorated with a Viennese ballroom scene, couples frozen mid-waltz in expensive detail. When I mentioned it, he said too quickly, "A gift from the Vance Foundation. They're quite generous to former colleagues." On my way out, I called Wolfe. Finch dismisses the lady but remembers her ballerina, claims minimal attendance but knows catalog numbers, and he's got Vienna dancing on his desk, courtesy of the foundation. "Noted," Wolfe said. "Proceed." The gallery of calculated charm. Julian Thorne's gallery occupied 3 floors of limestone elegance that whispered rather than shouted its prices. Thorne met me in a private viewing room, wearing a blazer that had learned its manners in Milan and a smile that had closed 1,000 deals. "Mr. Goodwin, Mr. Wolfe honors me by sending his representative. I'll try to be worthy of the honor." We settled into chairs positioned around a glass table that probably cost more than my car. Thorne steepled his fingers with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to being listened to. "The foundation represents a sacred trust," he began. "We steward Millicent's legacy, protect her vision. Occasionally we must sell pieces to preserve the whole. Deaccessioning is a tool, not a betrayal. Tell that to the charter." His smile admitted nothing and everything. charters require interpretation. Trevor Phelps is quite skilled at finding flexibility within legal frameworks. What about VF-32? Charming piece. The ballerina in blue silk was always a crowd favorite at exhibitions. I haven't seen it displayed in years. We rotate pieces for conservation purposes. Your conservation includes brass keys to my house? He laughed with the ease of a man who'd deflected harder questions. I collect influence, Mr. Goodwin, not hardware. You attended Millicent's musicales religiously, according to our information. Indeed. I particularly enjoyed Fritz's mulligatawny. He added toasted coconut. Extraordinary touch. I let that sit between us like a landmine. Fritz's mulligatawny hasn't left our kitchen in 30 years, and the recipes never included coconut. Thorne realized his mistake a beat too late. Millicent was a visionary in acquisition, he continued smoothly, but also a woman who attracted enemies. Lawrence Vance wanted immediate cash. Dr. Morse's parents wanted academic validation. Scholars wanted footnotes. I wanted preservation of the collection. And recordings hidden in music boxes. A slight tightening around his eyes. If someone suggested that to you, they were either misinformed or attempting to mislead you. Someone suggested plenty. I'm collecting motives. You'll find more than one, he said almost kindly. People rarely kill for single reasons. They kill for accumulations of grievance. The collector's resentment. Madame Evangeline Dubois received me in a Fifth Avenue apartment that resembled a museum of mechanical wonders. Singing bird boxes perched like jeweled judges, while clockwork figures observed from mahogany cabinets. She wore black silk, pearls that had witnessed history, and an expression that catalogued slights with perfect recall. Monsieur Goodwin, at last someone comes without a checkbook to ask what was promised and what was stolen. We took chairs beside a Boule cabinet worth more than most houses. She examined my shoes and found them acceptable, which felt like passing an entrance exam. Millicent promised me the celestial globe automaton, she declared, then reconsidered after certain board members objected. It vanished into conservation and reappeared at auction in Zurich. Apparently the view from Switzerland is quite profitable. Julian Thorne's objection? Mais oui. He preferred it remain accessible to scholars. It became accessible to the highest bidder instead. You attended the musicales regularly? Always. Millicent irritated me. Therefore, I respected her. She argued like a woman who kept ideas under her pillow, but she did not always choose wisely whom to trust. The music box. Madame Dubois' smile sharpened like a blade being honed. VF-32 once played correctly, a perfect blue Danube. Then, after a private meeting between Millicent and a man with expensive shoes and cheap ethics, the pauses appeared. She told me not to worry. Sometimes you must waltz around a truth until you can step on it, she said. Expensive shoes. Whose size? I do not measure men by their footwear, but I believe Millicent taught that box to testify, and whoever fears its testimony has already tried to erase other evidence. Her notebooks vanished. Her workshop violated. 3 months after she died, someone came with a key, searched thoroughly, left empty-handed and furious. You believe there's actually a recording. I believe Millicent could make a music box confess secrets. She leaned forward conspiratorially, and I believe whoever silenced her is still breathing, still afraid of what that little ballerina might say. The dissolute nephew Lawrence Vance occupied a corner stool at a 10th Avenue bar where the bourbon was honest and the lighting forgave sins. He had a face that remembered handsomeness and a laugh that apologized to nobody. He clapped my shoulder like we were fraternity brothers and ordered 2 drinks without asking my preference. Catherine stirring up ancient history, eh? She always did like spotlights. Millicent preferred mysteries. Me, I prefer cash in hand. How much cash did the Foundation provide for your cooperation? Finder's fees are respectable, Mr. Goodwin. I locate interested buyers. They purchase pieces. The foundation keeps operating. Everybody profits. Except the charter. Charters are suggestions written by dead people. Keys, Lawrence. His hand moved toward his pocket, then reconsidered. Lost mine years ago. Returned it officially. Water under bridges. You described the workshop break-in to someone. Mentioned specific tool marks on the workbench. That detail wasn't in any newspaper. He hesitated just long enough to confirm my suspicion. I hear things. Webb talks when he drinks, Phelps when he wins at cards, Baird when she's frightened. They're all frightened now. Of what? Of the wrong song playing in the wrong room, he said, draining his bourbon. Tell Wolfe he's painting targets on his house. Whoever's behind that music box doesn't negotiate. The pattern emerges. Back at the brown stone, I found Wolfe in his office, a botanical text open but unread. Dr. Morse was upstairs, presumably working on the musical attendance list. The music box sat in his safe, but its presence filled the room like an unplayed note. Dissonances, Wolfe said after I delivered my report. Finch's denial coupled with detailed knowledge. Thorne's false memory of Fritz's cooking. Madame Dubois' man with a key. Lawrence's inside information about the break-in. The deaccessions aren't peripheral, they're the main performance. And we're supposed to be waltzing while they're marching. He picked up Millicent Vance's letter and reread the crucial passage. Remember Vienna. Use the ballroom, not the street. His eyes narrowed in concentration. Archie, before dinner, retrieve the music box from the safe. Count the silences again, not their duration, but their sequence. And bring me the pattern in groups that make sense, not groups that please the ear. I spent an hour with the music box, winding it repeatedly, listening to the interrupted Blue Danube until the gaps began to sound like footsteps in an empty ballroom. The pattern emerged slowly. 3 short silences. Pause. 2 longer ones. Pause. 1 extended gap that lasted almost a full measure. Then the melody resumed normally. When I reported the sequence to Wolfe, he made a note and leaned back in his chair, that complex redistribution of mass that signals serious thinking. Tomorrow evening, Archie, we will not deliver Dr. Morse to blackmailers in Central Park. Instead, we will arrange for our suspects to hear what the music box has been trying to tell us for 30 years. And we will discover which of them already knows the tune by heart. The witness in the music box had kept its secret through 3 decades of silence. Tomorrow night, it would finally get its day in court, or rather, its evening in our office, where Nero Wolfe conducts the kind of justice that doesn't require a judge, only the truth and the courage to speak it. As I locked the music box back in the safe, I could swear I heard the ghost of a waltz, playing the spaces between the notes where secrets hide and wait for their moment to dance. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of October clarity that makes you forgive New York its summer sins, but it brought news that someone had been testing our hospitality while we slept. Fritz discovered it first, at 7:30 sharp, when he went to his spice rack for the morning's coffee ritual. I found him standing before his collection like a general surveying a battlefield, his face wearing the particular expression of distress reserved for violations of his sacred domain. Archie, he said, his voice carrying a note I'd heard perhaps 3 times in 20 years. Someone has been touching my spices. The rack held 47 small jars, each labeled in Fritz's precise script, each positioned according to a system that had evolved over 2 decades of culinary perfectionism. Now, 3 jars sat slightly askew: saffron, oregano, and thyme. Their positions shifted by perhaps half an inch, their labels no longer perfectly aligned. You're certain? Monsieur, I could identify each jar blindfolded by scent alone. These 3 have been moved, examined, and replaced incorrectly. His voice carried the wounded dignity of a man whose life's work had been casually disturbed. The saffron belongs between rosemary and sage, label facing forward. This morning it sits after thyme, 2 inches right, label turned 90 degrees. I checked the kitchen windows and the service entrance. Both remained locked, showing no signs of forced entry. The back door chain was properly set, the window latches secure. Whoever had visited Fritz's domain had possessed either exceptional lock-picking skills or legitimate access. "Fritz, anything else out of place?" He gestured toward the counter near the flour bin, where a faint handprint showed in the morning light, badly wiped, but visible to someone who knew his kitchen's usual pristine condition. "And the copper pot is 3 inches off center on its hook." Dr. Morse appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by our conversation. She wore the absorbed expression of someone who'd spent the night following complex trails through her grandmother's papers. "May I examine the jars?" she asked, approaching Fritz's collection with appropriate reverence. Fritz nodded reluctantly as she studied each displaced container. When she reached the oregano, she paused, unscrewing the lid and inhaling carefully. "This isn't oregano," she said quietly. "It's ground sage mixed with something else. Lavender, I think, and something metallic." She held the jar up to the morning light, revealing tiny metallic flakes scattered through the herb mixture like stars in a green sky. "Gold leaf," she breathed. "My grandmother used it in her experiments with acoustic preservation. She believed certain metals could enhance the recording capabilities of mechanical devices." "So someone planted this here?" I asked. "Or my grandmother did, 30 years ago, and someone came looking for it last night." She set the jar on the counter with careful precision. "The question is whether they found what they were looking for or just confirmed its existence." We carried our discoveries to Wolfe, who had descended from his morning communion with the orchids and settled into his chair with the morning mail. One look at our faces, and he set aside his correspondence. "Tell me," he said. I described Fritz's displaced spices and the suspicious herb mixture. When Dr. Morse explained about the gold leaf and its connection to her grandmother's acoustic experiments, Wolfe made a sound that might have been interest or calculation. "Bring the jar," he instructed. In the office, Wolfe examined the oregano container with methodical attention, unscrewing the lid and studying the metallic flakes with the focused concentration he usually reserved for new orchid specimens. "Sage, lavender, and gold leaf, as Dr. Morse observed," he said finally. "But also copper filings, I believe, and perhaps silver, a mixture designed to enhance conductivity in sound recording mechanisms." "Someone knew exactly what to look for," I observed. "Indeed. Someone familiar with Mrs. Vance's methods and her habit of hiding important materials in plain sight." Wolfe set down the jar and regarded Dr. Morse with steady attention. "Your grandmother's workshop? Was it in this house?" "The basement. She converted the old coal cellar into a laboratory for her acoustic experiments." "And you believe her equipment might still be there?" "I haven't been down there since I was a child, but if her instruments survived..." I was already moving toward the basement stairs, Fritz following with a flashlight. The basement occupied the same footprint as the house above, divided by support pillars and utility runs into irregular chambers. The coal cellar sat at the far end, behind a door Fritz used for seasonal storage. The door was locked, but the key hung on a nearby hook, the same style of brass key Dr. Morse had used to enter the house. Inside, we found what remained of Millicent Vance's workshop, preserved like a shrine to mechanical ingenuity. Workbenches lined 3 walls, supporting an array of precision tools that belonged in a watchmaker's shop. Microscopes sat beside tuning forks. Calipers shared space with bottles of oils and lubricants, and scattered across the main workbench were components that had clearly been disturbed recently, not destroyed, but examined and rearranged by someone who understood their purpose. "They've been here too," Dr. Morse said, surveying the scene. "This workbench was always organized according to a specific system. Someone has gone through everything." But the most telling evidence waited upstairs, in Wolfe's office. While we'd been exploring the basement, he'd been conducting his own investigation of the study. When we returned, he stood before his personal library, holding a volume I recognized, Das Geheimnis der Klangstrukturen, a treatise on hidden mathematical patterns in folk music. This book, he said, his voice carrying a cold precision, is always placed with its spine precisely aligned with its neighbors, its cover flush with the edge of the shelf. And it is never, under any circumstances, left with a page dog-eared. He held up the volume, revealing a single folded corner about a third of the way through. The marked page was dense with musical notation and mathematical formulae, discussing the concept of interrupted cadences and harmonic lacunae, the very theoretical framework behind Dr. Morse's grandmother's acoustic cryptography. Someone has examined this book and left a message, Wolfe continued. A demonstration that they understand not only the nature of the music box's contents, but the scholarly foundation underlying Mrs. Vance's methods. A calling card, I said. More than that, a challenge. They are asserting their own mastery of the subject while demonstrating their ability to penetrate our defenses. Wolfe closed the book with a decisive snap. This is not the work of a common burglar, nor even a desperate opportunist. This is the act of an intelligent, methodical opponent. The phone rang, interrupting our analysis. Inspector Kramer's voice came through with its usual blend of irritation and urgency. Wolfe, I just received an anonymous tip about a planned exchange in Central Park tonight. Something about a music box and a woman in danger. The caller mentioned your involvement specifically. Indeed, Wolfe said, settling more fully into his chair. The conservatory garden, I presume. 8 o'clock. You know about this? We received a similar invitation yesterday. The timing suggests our opponents are growing impatient. My people are already mobilizing, Kramer said. But I thought you should know. The tipster also mentioned information about illegal art sales and foundation irregularities. This thing's bigger than a simple extortion case. After Kramer hung up, Wolfe sat in contemplative silence, his gaze moving from the dog-eared book to the herb jar to the notes from our basement investigation. The pattern emerges, he said finally. Kitchen spices examined for hidden materials. Workshop equipment searched for missing components. Academic texts marked to demonstrate scholarly knowledge. And now police involvement to add pressure and urgency to tonight's confrontation. So the meeting in the park is definitely a trap. Unquestionably. But for whom remains to be determined. Wolfe picked up the phone and dialed Saul Panza's number. Saul, I require surveillance on this house beginning immediately. Also Fred Durkin and Ori Cather for mobile observation. Any person entering this building between sunset and sunrise is to be photographed and followed, not confronted. He hung up and turned to Dr. Morse. You will remain in this house tonight, under protection. The music box will accompany me to Central Park, but not for the purpose our blackmailer expects. What purpose, then? Wolfe's smile held the cold satisfaction of a chess master who'd seen his opponent's strategy 3 moves in advance. To demonstrate that some witnesses cannot be silenced by threats, and some truth cannot be buried by trespass, no matter how subtle. The brownstone had been violated, its order disturbed, its security tested. But in their careful examination of spices and books and workshop equipment, our opponents had revealed more about themselves than they'd learned about us. They were scholars as well as criminals, familiar with both Millicent Vance's methods and the academic theories underlying them. They possessed keys and knowledge, patience and desperation in equal measure. Most importantly, they had made the mistake of treating Nero Wolfe's home as their personal research library. That was the kind of trespass that demanded not just justice, but a demonstration of exactly who controlled the game they thought they were playing. The witness in the music box had been patient for 30 years. Tonight, it would finally have its day in court, or rather, its evening in Central Park, where the truth would dance to a tune our opponents had never learned to play. Thursday afternoon brought the kind of tension that makes a brownstone feel like a pressure cooker with the safety valve welded shut. The subtle trespass of the morning had confirmed what we already suspected. Our adversary possessed both intelligence and audacity. Now, with evening approaching and the conservatory garden meeting looming, the pressure began building from multiple directions at once. Saul Panzer's first report came at 2:30, delivered in the calm, professional tone of a man who'd spent decades watching people who didn't want to be watched. 3 separate surveillance teams, he said. Florist van across the street. Blue Danube blooms on the side, but the DOT medallion's counterfeit, and there's a coil of communications cable where the hose reel should be. Drivers, reading yesterday's post and watching your door in the side mirror. We don't order flowers, I told him. We grow them. Second team's mobile. Dark sedan, 2 occupants, been circling the block every 20 minutes since noon. Professional spacing, good discipline. Third team's on foot. Messenger with a bag who times pedestrian traffic and checks his watch whenever anyone leaves your building. Wolfe absorbed this information with the steady attention he usually reserves for orchid catalogs. They are documenting our routines and testing our awareness. The pressure is being applied systematically. It gets better, Saul continued. Your phone line's been tapped. Passive device. Good workmanship. I left it in place and added my own piggyback. The tap has tool marks from a jeweler's screwdriver. Webb, I said. He's got the hands for precision work. At 3:15, the financial pressure arrived via telephone. Trevor Phelps' voice carried the particular urgency of a lawyer who'd been authorized to spend serious money. Mr. Goodwin, we need to resolve this situation immediately. The Foundation's board has authorized me to offer $200,000 for the return of certain materials and the cessation of your investigation. I covered the mouthpiece and relayed the figure to Wolfe, whose eyebrows rose precisely 1/16 of an inch, his equivalent of visible shock. 200,000, he murmured. The stakes are considerably higher than we calculated. Cash, Phelps continued when I returned to the call. Today. Complete resolution, no questions asked. Everyone walks away, satisfied. Mr. Phelps, I said, we're not in the business of selling evidence or abandoning clients. If you want to discuss terms, you can present yourself here at 4 o'clock with a complete accounting of Foundation deaccessions since 1988. The silence stretched long enough to time a waltz. Then, Mr. Goodwin, you're making a serious mistake. There are forces at work here that extend far beyond your understanding. Some secrets are protected by people who don't negotiate and don't leave witnesses. Enlighten us. The offer I've made represents the last reasonable solution. If you decline, you'll discover that tonight's meeting is the least of your concerns. The line went dead with the finality of a coffin lid closing. Dr. Morse looked up from her grandmother's papers, her face pale. $200,000 means they're desperate. My grandmother's acoustic cryptography research wasn't just academic. She believed it could revolutionize information storage. Imagine embedding entire databases in musical performances, hiding corporate secrets in symphonies. The military applications alone would be worth millions. And if the Foundation has been selling pieces of her collection to private collectors, I observed, they could have been distributing her research methods along with the instruments. Each collector possessing a fragment of the complete system, Wolfe concluded, without understanding the whole. Until now. The doorbell interrupted our analysis. Through the one-way glass, I could see Dr. Marcus Webb, but this wasn't the composed academic who'd visited us earlier. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his hands shaking as he pressed the bell repeatedly. Dr. Webb, I said, opening the door. You look like you've had a rough night. They destroyed everything, he said without preamble, pushing past me into the hall. My apartment, my research, 30 years of work, gone. In the office, Webb collapsed into the yellow chair with the exhausted relief of a man who'd reached sanctuary. His voice was hoarse, his eyes red-rimmed from what might have been smoke or tears. 3 of them came around midnight. Professionals. They didn't steal anything, they destroyed it systematically. Every notebook, every photograph, every document related to Millicent's research. They even dismantled my computer and removed the hard drive. You saw them? I was at the library, working late on a paper. When I returned, they were finishing up. One of them saw me in the hallway and said, "Dr. Webb, you should find a new research specialty. This one's become unhealthy." Wolfe regarded Webb with the clinical attention of a physician examining symptoms. Your apartment was searched, not burglarized. They sought specific materials. What did you possess that they feared? Webb's trembling hands reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small leather journal, its cover worn smooth by decades of handling. Millicent's private notes from the last 6 months of her life. She gave it to me the week before she died, told me to keep it safe until someone asked the right questions. He placed the journal on Wolfe's desk like an offering to an altar. The pages were filled with Millicent Vance's precise handwriting, formulas, diagrams, and what appeared to be detailed transcriptions of conversations. Wolfe opened the journal and read silently, his expression growing more thoughtful with each page. Finally, he looked up with the satisfaction of a man who'd found the missing piece of a complex puzzle. "Dr. Webb, this journal contains comprehensive records of your colleagues' private statements during the musicals. Mrs. Vance was documenting not just her acoustic experiments, but the personal confessions and business discussions that occurred in her presence. She called it her social archaeology," Webb explained. She believed people revealed their true natures when they thought they were among friends. Financial irregularities, academic fraud, personal betrayals. She heard it all and recorded it all. "The music box recording isn't an isolated piece of evidence," Dr. Morse said, understanding dawning in her voice. "It's part of a comprehensive intelligence archive." "Precisely," Wolfe said, closing the journal with decisive finality. "Mrs. Vance created an intelligence operation disguised as scholarly social gatherings. The music box contains one crucial recording among many, but it represents the key to understanding the entire system." The phone rang again. Inspector Kramer's voice carried the particular frustration of a man dealing with bureaucratic complications. "Wolfe, I've got a problem. The anonymous tip about tonight's meeting has been corroborated by another source, but with a twist. My informant claims this isn't just a threat against Dr. Morse. It's a transaction of significant cultural value involving a high-profile collector. They're trying to present it as a legitimate, albeit illicit, art deal." "Indeed," Wolfe purred. "And which of our acquaintances might fit that description?" Julian Thorne's name came up. Madame Dubois was also mentioned. "Look, Wolfe, my men are setting up a perimeter around the garden, but this cultural transaction angle complicates things. We can't just storm in without probable cause." After Kramer hung up, Wolfe sat in contemplative silence, his gaze moving from Webb's journal to the safe where the music box waited. The pattern was becoming clear. Financial pressure through Phelps' offer, physical intimidation through Webb's apartment destruction, professional surveillance of the brownstone, and now legal maneuvering to control the narrative around tonight's confrontation. "They are attempting to manage every aspect of this situation," Wolfe observed. "The surveillance to gauge our preparedness, the financial offer to test our resolve, the destruction of Webb's materials to eliminate corroborating evidence, and the manipulation of police intelligence to control tonight's outcome." "So what's our play?" I asked. Wolfe's smile held the cold precision of a chess master who'd seen his opponent's strategy and found it wanting. "We will indeed attend tonight's meeting, Archie, but not to negotiate or surrender. We will go to demonstrate that some witnesses cannot be silenced by money or threats, and some truths refuse to stay buried, no matter how much pressure is applied." He picked up Millicent Vance's letter and reread the crucial margin note. "Remember, Vienna, use the ballroom, not the street." "The ballroom," he said quietly. "Not the street, not the park. Mrs. Vance understood that the most important performances require the proper venue. Tonight, we will ensure that when the music plays, everyone will be listening to the silences, and those silences will speak volumes. Saul called again at 5:30. The surveillance teams are pulling back, but not abandoning their positions. They're giving you room to move, which suggests they want you to feel confident about tonight. Also, the florist van just received a delivery. Small package, hand-carried by someone in expensive shoes. Expensive shoes, I repeated. Our collector friends do like their footwear. One more thing, Saul added. Fred spotted a familiar face near the conservatory garden entrance, Lawrence Vance, but he wasn't drinking. He was sober, alert, and talking to someone in a town car. Whatever's happening tonight, the family's involved. As evening approached, the brownstone settled into the particular quiet that precedes action. Dr. Morse remained safely upstairs, working through her grandmother's musical attendance lists. Webb's journal sat in Wolfe's safe alongside the music box, two pieces of evidence that together painted a picture of 30 years of secrets, lies, and carefully maintained silence. The pressure had been applied from every angle: financial, physical, legal, and psychological. But pressure, as any student of physics knows, can be redirected. And Nero Wolfe had spent a lifetime learning how to turn his opponent's force against them. The witness in the music box had waited 3 decades for its moment. Tonight, in the ballroom of Wolfe's choosing, it would finally dance to a tune that would make everyone listen, whether they wanted to or not. The game was entering its final phase, and all the players were moving into position. The only question remaining was who would still be standing when the music stopped. There are times when Nero Wolfe reminds me less of a detective than of a conductor preparing for a symphony he's been composing in his head for 30 years. Thursday evening, with the conservatory garden rendezvous looming and pressure building from every direction, was definitely one of those times. He didn't move much. He never does. But he made the entire brownstone move around him like an orchestra tuning up for the performance of a lifetime. The ballroom, he said, tapping Millicent Vance's letter with a forefinger the size of a bratwurst. Not the street, not the park. If our adversary insists on a performance, we shall oblige, but on our stage, with our orchestra, and according to my tempo. At 6:30, he began positioning his pieces with the methodical precision of a chess master who'd seen the endgame 20 moves in advance. The music box sat on his desk like a silent conductor's baton, waiting for its moment to lead the final movement. Archie, he said, settling more fully into his chair, call Inspector Kramer. Tell him we require a visible police presence at the conservatory garden from 7:45 to 8:15. After that, his men should become invisible but remain vigilant. Invisible how? They will withdraw conspicuously, allowing our opponents to believe they have a clear field. In reality, they will maintain surveillance from concealed positions. The goal is to make our adversaries feel confident enough to reveal themselves. I reached Kramer at headquarters, where he was coordinating what he probably thought was a straightforward park rendezvous. Inspector, Wolfe needs a favor. Visible police presence at the garden, then a strategic withdrawal. Strategic withdrawal, Wolfe, if you're planning one of your theatrical demonstrations. I'm planning justice, Inspector. The theatrical elements are merely to ensure everyone plays their proper role. Next, Wolfe dictated 6 carefully crafted messages. Not letters, but invitations to a performance our suspects wouldn't be able to resist attending. Each was tailored to exploit specific weaknesses and fears. To Lila Baird, the Foundation's deaccession irregularities will be discussed at 9 o'clock this evening. Your presence may mitigate exposure regarding the Celestial Globe auction. Absence will constitute consent to full disclosure. To Trevor Phelps, legal complications regarding charter violations require immediate attention. 9 o'clock, bring documentation of all Foundation amendments since 1988, or explain their absence to federal investigators. To Dean Finch, academic integrity questions demand resolution. 9 o'clock, we will discuss your tenure committee statements regarding the Morse family and your authentication of disputed research. To Julian Thorne, provenance irregularities in recent auctions require clarification. 9 o'clock, your expertise in adjusting documentation may prove valuable or incriminating. To Madame Dubois, the promise Millicent made will finally be honored. 9 o'clock, the man with expensive shoes will be present to explain his interpretation of agreements. To Lawrence Vance, family obligations and finder's fees require accounting. 9 o'clock, your keys, all of them, and your memory of certain conversations will be essential. While I delivered these invitations by hand, messenger services can't convey the proper undertone of polite menace. Wolfe orchestrated the evening's opening movement by telephone. "Saul," he said, "I require a decoy for the conservatory garden. A package identical in size and weight to the music box, wrapped appropriately and placed on the designated bench at 7:55. Fred and Ori will document every reaction, every approach, every failure to approach." "And the real music box?" Saul asked. "Remains here, awaiting its true audience. Tonight's park meeting is merely the overture to a more intimate performance." At 7:30, turned from my rounds with a collection of interesting reactions. Baird had gone pale, reading her invitation in the Foundation lobby. Phelps had stopped pacing his Tribeca loft mid-stride. Finch's secretary had tried to bar the door until I mentioned tenure committee irregularities. Thorne had accepted with a smile that could have cut glass. Madame Dubois had inclined her head and said, "Enfin, finally." Lawrence Vance had chuckled without humor and ordered another drink. The conservatory garden operation unfolded with the precision Wolfe had orchestrated. Saul's reports came in like clockwork, the decoy package placed as scheduled, surveillance teams moving in and pulling back, the florist van driver walking past without touching it, a dark sedan slowing, then speeding up, and Lawrence Vance spotted near the entrance talking on a burner phone. "Most illuminating," Wolfe observed, when Saul reported that a woman in a red coat had examined the package and left a note. "They are confirming their knowledge while testing our resolve." The note, retrieved and delivered to the brownstone, was typed with chilling directness. "This is your last warning. The music box belongs to us. Its contents are our property. Deliver it to the location specified in the original arrangement by midnight, or Dr. Morse will not live to see dawn." "Original arrangement," Dr. Morse whispered, reading over Wolfe's shoulder. The pattern of silences in the music. "Indeed," Wolfe said, his eyes gleaming with cold satisfaction. "They have revealed not only their knowledge of Mrs. Vance's methods, but their assumption that threats will compel our cooperation. They are about to discover the error in their calculation." At 8:45, the brownstone began filling with our invited guests. Fritz had arranged the office chairs in Wolfe's preferred geometry for intellectual combat. The red chair for allies, yellow for witnesses, and a careful semicircle for those whose guilt remained to be determined. Lila Baird arrived first with Trevor Phelps, both wearing the careful composure of people prepared for difficult negotiations. Julian Thorne followed, his usual charm slightly strained. Dean Finch appeared with academic dignity, barely concealing nervous energy. Madame Dubois swept in wearing pearls and an expression of anticipatory satisfaction. Lawrence Vance brought up the rear with a young lawyer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Dr. Webb, who had remained in the front room during our preparations, joined the gathering with the resigned air of a man who'd already confessed his sins and was waiting for absolution. At 9 o'clock precisely, Wolfe entered and settled into his chair with the deliberate ceremony of a judge taking the bench. He surveyed his assembled audience, suspects, witnesses, and collaborators, with the satisfaction of a conductor preparing to lead a symphony he'd been composing for 30 years. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the authority that makes people listen whether they want to or not. "You are here because Mrs. Millicent Vance preserved evidence of a murder, and someone in this room knows exactly what that evidence contains." He picked up the music box and wound it slowly, letting the interrupted Blue Danube fill the room with its coded message. As the mechanical ballerina spun through her eternal dance, I watched faces carefully. Baird's composure cracked slightly. Thorne's smile became fixed. Finch developed a nervous twitch. Madame Dubois leaned forward with predatory interest. Lawrence Vance went very still. When the music stopped, Wolfe opened Millicent Vance's journal to a marked page. This device contains more than a waltz. It contains a conversation, recorded 30 years ago in this very room, a confession to murdering Dr. Catherine Morse's parents. The silence that followed was the kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. Furthermore, Wolfe continued, Mrs. Vance documented a comprehensive pattern of financial irregularities, academic fraud, and personal betrayals. He read aloud. JT admitted to falsifying provenance documents. LB confirmed Foundation Board approval for off-book sales. MW expressed concern about LV's gambling debts, forcing desperate measures. Each revelation hit its target with surgical precision. But it was Lawrence Vance who broke first, his hand moving toward his jacket pocket with sudden desperation. "Lawrence," Madame Dubois said quietly, her accent more pronounced with excitement, "I believe you should listen to what the music box has to say before you do something irreversible." Wolfe's smile held the cold satisfaction of a chess master who'd seen his opponent's strategy and found it wanting. "Indeed, Mr. Vance. The witness has waited 30 years to tell its story. Tonight, it will finally have its day in court." He reached for the music box again, and in that moment, every person in the room understood that the real performance was just beginning. The ballroom was prepared, the orchestra was in position, and Nero Wolfe was ready to conduct the symphony of justice that would finally bring 30 years of secrets into the light. The positioning was complete. Now came the music, and the silences that would speak louder than any melody. The silence that followed Wolfe's accusation was the kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. Lawrence Vance's hand had frozen halfway to his jacket pocket, Madame Dubois' warning hanging in the air like a blade catching light. The others, Baird, Phelps, Thorne, Finch, and Webb, sat with the rigid attention of people who'd suddenly realized they weren't watching a demonstration. They were attending their own trial. "Mr. Vance," Wolfe said with deceptive mildness, "I suggest you complete that gesture slowly and with great care. Whatever you're reaching for will not improve your situation." Lawrence's hand emerged, holding not a weapon, but a brass key identical to the one Dr. Morse had used to enter our house. He placed it on the small table beside his chair with the careful precision of a man defusing a bomb. "Millicent gave me this in 1987, he said, his usual jovial bluster completely absent. "She said it was for emergencies. I never imagined she meant emergencies like this." "You used it 3 nights ago to search Fritz's kitchen," Wolfe observed. "Looking for the herbal mixture your aunt had prepared for her acoustic experiments, the gold leaf and copper filings that enhanced her recording capabilities." Wolfe wound the music box again, and as the interrupted Blue Danube filled the room, he began his methodical dissection of 30 years of carefully maintained lies. The technical foundation. "Dr. Morse," Wolfe said, not taking his eyes off the assembled suspects, "explain for our guests your grandmother's method. Precisely." Dr. Morse kept her hands steady on her lap. She developed what she called harmonic lacunae, a system of embedding information in the gaps within strictly metered musical pieces. Not simple Morse code, but 5 distinct types of silence: quarter rests, eighth rests, half rests, whole rests, and extended pauses. Each type corresponded to specific letters using a key she called Vienna hand, based on the 5 positions of classical waltz technique. The Blue Danube, Wolfe continued, being rigid in its 3/4 time structure, provided a perfect substrate for this encoding. The mechanical music box, with its precise timing mechanism, could reproduce these silences with absolute fidelity across decades. He paused the music box and opened Millicent's journal to a page marked with red ribbon. Mrs. Vance was more than a musicologist. She was a social archaeologist who understood that the most revealing truths emerged not in formal statements, but in the casual intimacies of conversation. These music halls were her laboratory, and this room her recording studio. The systematic revelation, Ms. Baird, Wolfe said, his gaze settling on the Foundation director. The deaccessions, who authorized the systematic sale of Foundation pieces at prices well above appraised values. Her composure cracked like ice in spring. The board, the endowment was failing. Names, Wolfe commanded. Julian drafted the plan. I implemented it. Trevor provided the legal framework. Phelps shifted uncomfortably. I advised on lawful procedures. You advised on circumventing charter restrictions, Wolfe corrected. Mr. Thorne, you claimed familiarity with this house through the musicals, yet you praised Fritz's mulligatawny with coconut, an ingredient never used in our kitchen. You lied about your presence here because your actual visits were far more limited and far more significant. Thorne's practiced charm was evaporating. Memory can be imprecise, but mechanical recording cannot, Wolfe interrupted. Dr. Webb, tell us about the conversation you witnessed between Mr. Thorne and Lawrence Vance on March 15th, 1987. Webb's hands trembled as he spoke. Julian was explaining to Lawrence how the Morse parents' investigation into Foundation finances could destroy them all. Lawrence said something about permanent solutions to temporary problems. I thought it was just talk. The kind of thing people say when they're frustrated. It was not mere talk, Wolfe said quietly. Mrs. Vance recorded that conversation, along with Lawrence's subsequent confession 3 days later when he returned to this room in a state of agitation and admitted to Julian that he had taken care of the problem by tampering with the Morses' automobile. The confession revealed. Lawrence Vance stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You can't prove any of this. Even if that box contains something, it's 30 years old. Sit down, Wolfe commanded with such authority that Lawrence complied immediately. The music box contains your voice, Mr. Vance, recorded on March 18, 1987, confessing to Julian Thorne that you had severed the brake lines and damaged the steering mechanism of your colleague's automobile. You believed you were speaking privately in a room with only a child's toy as witness. Wolfe wound the music box and let it play through its complete cycle, then began transcribing the pattern of silences onto his notepad. The encoded message, when decoded using your aunt's Vienna hand system, spells out LARRYKILLEDTHEMFORMONEY. The room went dead silent, except for the mechanical whir of the music box winding down. Furthermore, Wolfe continued, opening Webb's journal, Dr. Webb's contemporaneous notes corroborate every detail. The gambling debts that motivated your desperation, the Foundation finder's fees that provided your payment, Mr. Thorne's promise to provide alibis and suppress evidence. The supporting evidence. The phone rang, and I answered with professional composure despite the electricity in the room. Inspector Kramer's voice carried the satisfaction of a cop who just cracked a cold case. Wolfe, we found it. The Morse's vehicle was never destroyed as reported. It's been sitting in a police impound lot in Westchester for 30 years. Brake lines severed, steering column tampered with, and enough forensic evidence to support murder charges. We also executed search warrants on Foundation offices and recovered financial records showing systematic theft disguised as deaccessions. I relayed the information, watching the last vestiges of hope drain from the conspirators' faces. Madame Dubois, Wolfe said, turning to the elegant woman who'd been observing with predatory satisfaction, you were not merely an attendee of these musicales. You were Mrs. Vance's confederate in preserving this evidence. May we, she replied with dignified pride. Millicent knew she was in danger after she recorded Lawrence's confession. She needed someone who understood both the technical aspects of her work and the criminal nature of what she had documented. I have been waiting 30 years for the proper moment to ensure justice. The final accounting, Lawrence Vance, Wolfe said with judicial finality. You murdered Dr. and Mrs. Morse to prevent them from exposing your theft from the Foundation endowment. Julian Thorne, you facilitated the murders by providing alibis and coordinating the cover-up, then spent 30 years systematically looting the Foundation while searching for the evidence that could destroy you. Lila Baird, you used your position to facilitate these crimes. Trevor Phelps, you provided the legal framework for charter violations. Dr. Webb, you were coerced into authentication fraud through threats to your career. Lawrence Vance's composure finally shattered completely. 30 years, he whispered, his face in his hands. I've lived with this for 30 years, knowing that damned music box could destroy me. The music box preserved the truth, Wolfe corrected quietly. Mrs. Vance ensured that justice would eventually be served, even if she couldn't live to see it herself. As Inspector Kramer's officers began arriving to escort the conspirators into custody, I reflected on the elegant precision of Millicent Vance's long-term strategy. She had created not just evidence, but a mechanism for ensuring that evidence would surface at exactly the right moment, presented to exactly the right person, in exactly the right way to guarantee justice. The witness in the music box had kept it secret for 3 decades, dancing its silent waltz while waiting for the proper audience. Now, finally, it had sung its song of truth, and the melody would echo through courtrooms until every note of justice had been played. Wolfe sat back in his chair with the satisfaction of a conductor who'd just led a flawless performance of a complex symphony. The ballroom had been prepared, the orchestra positioned, and justice conducted with the precision that only truth can provide. The gathering was complete. The music had played, and in the silences between the notes, 30 years of secrets had finally found their voice. The silence that followed Lawrence Vance's broken confession was the kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat and the weight of 30 years pressing down on a single moment. Wolfe regarded the assembled company with the steady attention of a conductor preparing to lead the final movement of a symphony he'd been composing since the music box first played its interrupted waltz in our office. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying the authority that makes people listen whether they want to or not. You have heard Mr. Vance's admission, but confession without context is merely noise. Justice requires understanding, not just what was done, but why and by whom it was orchestrated. He picked up the music box and wound it slowly, letting the coded Blue Danube fill the room one final time. As the mechanical ballerina spun through her eternal dance, Wolfe began his methodical dissection of 30 years of carefully maintained lies. The technical foundation. Dr. Morse, Wolfe said, not taking his eyes off the assembled suspects. Explain once more for our guests your grandmother's method. Precisely. Dr. Morse's voice was steady despite the tears on her cheeks. She developed what she called harmonic lacunae, a system of embedding information in the gaps within strictly metered musical pieces. 5 distinct types of silence: quarter rests, eighth rests, half rests, whole rests, and extended pauses. Each type corresponded to specific letters using a key she called Vienna hand, based on the 5 positions of classical waltz technique. Quarter rest, left foot forward, Wolfe elaborated with clinical precision. Eighth rest, gather, half rest, turn, whole rest, set. Extended pause. Promenade. The sequence on VF32 when grouped by measures rather than individual beats. Use the ballroom, not the street, as Mrs. Vance instructed. Spells the sentence that condemns you, Mr. Vance. Larry killed them for money. Lawrence Vance's hands trembled as the mathematical precision of his aunt's justice became clear. The mastermind revealed. But you, Mr. Vance, Wolfe continued, his gaze shifting to Julian Thorne, were merely the instrument. The architect of this 30-year deception sits among us wearing the mask of respectability and the tools of his trade. Charm, connections, and an absolute willingness to sacrifice human lives for financial gain. Julian Thorne's practiced composure was cracking like ice in spring. Mr. Wolfe, I hardly think you will think precisely what I tell you to think, Wolfe interrupted with Arctic authority. You are the mastermind, Mr. Thorne. Not merely a collaborator or facilitator, but the designer of a criminal enterprise that began with fraud, escalated to murder, and continued for 3 decades as systematic theft disguised as cultural stewardship. Wolfe opened Millicent's journal to a page marked with red ribbon. Mrs. Vance documented your March 10th, 1987 meeting with the Foundation Board, where you proposed what you euphemistically called permanent solutions to temporary problems. When Lawrence understood your meaning literally rather than metaphorically, you did not dissuade him. You encouraged him. The systematic conspiracy? The Dexession scheme was your creation, Wolfe continued, his voice gaining the momentum of inexorable logic. You convinced Ms. Baird that selling pieces to private collectors at premium prices was conservation, not theft. You enlisted Mr. Phelps to provide legal frameworks for circumventing charter restrictions. You manipulated Dr. Webb through threats to his career, forcing him to authenticate fraudulent sales. Lila Baird's composure finally shattered. Julian promised it would save the Foundation. It saved nothing but Mr. Thorne's reputation and bank account, Wolfe corrected coldly. The Foundation became a front for money laundering, with each deaccession funding not preservation, but personal enrichment and the continued silence of Mr. Vance. He turned to Trevor Phelps, whose legal training had abandoned him entirely. Your charter amendments, your provenance documentation, your insurance adjustments, all bore the seal of professional respectability while facilitating systematic theft. You convinced yourself you were saving Millicent Vance's legacy. Instead, you were destroying it piece by piece. The murder method. Lawrence, Wolfe commanded. Explain to Dr. Morse exactly how you killed her parents. Lawrence's voice emerged as barely a whisper. I knew cars. Worked in a garage during college. The Taconic Parkway has those curves near Millwood. If their brakes failed and the steering locked up at speed, he stopped, unable to continue. The brake lines, Wolfe prompted remorselessly. Cut with precision to fail under pressure, the steering column coupling, damaged to cause catastrophic failure during sharp turns. It looked like mechanical failure, metal fatigue, just 2 promising academics who died in a tragic accident. Dr. Morse closed her eyes, finally hearing the truth about her parents' last moments. The cover-up campaign. The investigation was managed by Mr. Thorne's connections, Wolfe continued. No detailed forensics, no criminal inquiry, just convenient mechanical failure. For 30 years, you believed you had successfully buried the evidence. But Mrs. Vance had created something more durable than your conspiracy. She had created mechanical memory, encoded truth that would outlast all of you. The phone rang, and Inspector Kramer's voice carried the satisfaction of a corp who just closed a major case. Wolfe, we've got everything. The Morse's vehicle, still in impound after 30 years. Brake lines severed, steering column tampered with, enough forensic evidence to support murder charges. We also executed search warrants on Foundation offices, financial records showing systematic theft disguised as conservation. The final accounting. As Kramer's officers began entering the office, Wolfe delivered his final judgment with the authority of absolute moral certainty. Julian Thorne, you orchestrated the murder of Dr. and Mrs. Morse to prevent exposure of your fraudulent acquisition practices. You spent 30 years systematically looting the Foundation while living in constant fear of a music box that contained the truth you thought you had buried. Lawrence Vance, you were the weapon he wielded, desperate, weak, and willing to commit murder for money. Your aunt's recording preserved not just your confession, but your exact words. I took care of the problem permanently. Lila Baird, Trevor Phelps, you facilitated these crimes through willful blindness and professional complicity. Dr. Webb, you were coerced, but you preserved the evidence that condemned them all. As the handcuffs clicked and rights were read, Julian Thorne looked back at the music box with something approaching respect. 30 years, he said quietly. She waited 30 years. She waited for justice, Wolfe corrected. And justice, unlike criminals, is patient. The restoration of order. When the office finally emptied of everyone except Dr. Morse, Dr. Webb, Madame Dubois, and ourselves, the brownstone settled into its familiar quiet. The music box sat silent on Wolfe's desk, its witness finally heard, its secret finally revealed. Your grandmother, Wolfe told Dr. Morse, understood that the most important truths are often spoken in moments of assumed privacy. She created a system for preserving those truths and ensuring they would surface when justice demanded their testimony. Dr. Morse touched the music box gently, as if greeting an old friend. She always said the silences were more important than the song. Tonight, Wolfe observed with quiet satisfaction, the silences spoke volumes. As Fritz appeared to announce that dinner was served, Wolfe carefully placed the music box in his safe, not as evidence any longer, but as a monument to the patient persistence of truth. The witness had danced its final waltz of secrets. Justice had been served with the precision that only mechanical memory and moral certainty could provide. The brownstone had been disturbed, its order tested, its sanctuary violated. But in the end, it had provided exactly what Millicent Vance had hoped for 30 years ago. A proper venue for truth, a ballroom where justice could dance to its own eternal rhythm, and a conductor who understood that some performances are worth waiting a lifetime to hear. The reveal was complete. The music had played, and in the spaces between the notes, 30 years of silence had finally found their voice. If you want to know what satisfaction looks like at our address, it isn't champagne or congratulations. It's Fritz repositioning his spice rack with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, Wolfe settling into his chair without the weight of unresolved questions, and the brownstone itself taking what I can only describe as a deep, cleansing breath after 3 days of having its sacred routines violated by necessity. The exodus of Inspector Kramer's entourage left behind the particular quiet that follows a storm. Not empty silence, but the kind of peace that comes after justice has been properly served. Dr. Catherine Morse remained in the red leather chair, her face showing the complex relief of someone who'd finally heard the truth about her parents' death. Dr. Webb sat in the yellow chair, looking decades younger, as if confessing his 30-year burden had restored parts of his spine he'd forgotten he possessed. Madame Dubois occupied the remaining chair with the serene satisfaction of a woman who'd kept faith with a friend for 3 decades and seen that faith rewarded. The immediate reckoning. The phone rang at 9:15. Inspector Kramer's voice carried the particular satisfaction of a cop who'd just closed a case that had been nagging at him since before he knew it existed. Wolfe, the DA's office is already moving. Thorne's lawyer is making noise about deals, but we've got him cold on conspiracy to commit murder, plus 30 years of fraud and theft. Phelps is cooperating fully. Apparently, he kept copies of everything, including the original charter violations. Baird's singing like a canary about the deaccession scheme. And Vance, he paused. Vance just sits there staring at his hands. I think the weight of 30 years finally hit him. The evidence chain? Wolfe inquired. Airtight. The music box is in our most secure facility, along with Mrs. Vance's journal. The Westchester DA is reopening the Morse case as a double homicide. And Wolfe, the forensics team, found something interesting in that impound yard. Tool marks on the brake lines match a specific type of mechanic's cutter. We're tracking down where Vance would have had access to those tools in 1987. After Kramer hung up, Wolfe turned his attention to our remaining guests. Dr. Morse, the practical matters. Your grandmother's collection will be restored to its proper purpose, but you must decide your own role carefully. Avoid the temptation to manage what you've helped to liberate. I understand, she said quietly. I want to finish her work on acoustic cryptography, not administer a foundation. Madame Dubois has offered to serve as interim director while a proper board is assembled. Madame Dubois inclined her head with elegant authority. The celestial globe automaton will be returned, properly catalogued and displayed as Millicent intended. The Foundation will honor its original charter, not the perverted version Julian created. The civilized conclusion. Fritz appeared in the doorway with the ceremonial precision of a man announcing the restoration of natural order. "Dinner is served," he said, and something in his tone suggested that after 3 days of disruption, chaos, and strangers violating his kitchen, the universe had finally returned to its proper orbit. In the dining room, Fritz had prepared duckling with cherry sauce, accompanied by a rice pilaf that refused to play second fiddle to anything. The conversation was deliberately civilized, a conscious return to the brownstone's normal rhythms after the evening's necessary barbarism. "Your grandmother," Wolfe told Dr. Morse as he carved his duckling with surgical precision, understood something that escaped her murderers entirely. She knew that the most damaging truths are often spoken casually in moments when people believe they are among friends. The musicales weren't social gatherings. They were intelligence operations disguised as scholarly hospitality. Dr. Webb nodded, his voice carrying the wonder of someone seeing familiar events from an entirely new perspective. She encouraged people to speak freely, to confess their fears and ambitions. I thought she was being gracious. She was being methodical. The acoustic cryptography wasn't just academic theory, Dr. Morse added. It was practical information storage. She embedded truth in art, knowing that art outlasts the people who create it and the people who try to destroy it. Wolfe raised his wine glass slightly, not in toast, but in acknowledgement. Mrs. Vance created mechanical memory more reliable than human recollection. The Blue Danube, being rigidly structured, could preserve her message with absolute fidelity across decades. But more importantly, she understood that justice requires not just truth, but the proper moment for truth to be heard. The philosophical framework. As Fritz served his legendary chocolate soufflé, a creation that could make diplomats abandon their principles, Wolfe leaned back in his chair with the contemplative air of a man processing the deeper implications of the case they'd just resolved. "This matter illustrates a fundamental principle," he observed. "The guilty invariably believe they have successfully buried their crimes, when in fact they have merely created the conditions for their eventual exposure. Truth, like water, finds its way to the surface regardless of the obstacles placed in its path." Thorne spent 30 years building a reputation on stolen legitimacy, Dr. Morse said, thinking he could transform theft into stewardship through charm and influence. He never understood that my grandmother had created something more durable than his deceptions. Lawrence Vance lived in fear of a music box, I added, never realizing that his fear itself was evidence of his guilt. Madame Dubois smiled with the satisfaction of a woman who'd witnessed the proper conclusion to an improperly interrupted story. Millicent understood that patience is the most powerful weapon in the arsenal of justice. She made that little ballerina into a guardian of truth. The final restoration. After our guests departed, Dr. Morse with plans to complete her grandmother's research, Dr. Webb with a promise to testify fully, and Madame Dubois with the authority to restore the foundation's integrity. The brownstone settled into its nighttime quiet. I straightened the office chairs, filed the evening's paperwork, and made a mental note to have the locksmith change the service entrance cylinder as well. The music box sat in the safe, no longer evidence but monument, a testament to the patient persistence of truth and the elegant precision of mechanical memory. 30 years, I observed, settling into my desk chair with a brandy. She waited 30 years for the right moment. She waited for the right conductor, Wolfe corrected, picking up a book on orchid cultivation. Someone who understood that justice is not a destination but a performance, one that requires the proper venue, the right audience, and absolute precision in its execution. He opened the book but didn't read, his eyes distant with thought. Mrs. Vance understood something that escaped her enemies entirely. We are accustomed to valuing what sounds, statements, declarations, confessions, but structure is shaped as much by absence as by presence. A waltz is defined not just by its notes, but by its timing. A life is marked as indelibly by what one refuses to do as by what one accomplishes. The phone rang one final time. Saul Panzer's voice carried his usual economy of words. The surveillance teams have withdrawn. The florist van's been impounded. Fred and Ori send their regards and their bills. The brownstone is secure. Thank you, Saul. Send your own bill as well. As I hung up, Fritz appeared to collect the brandy glasses, his movements carrying the ceremonial precision of a man restoring order to a universe that had been temporarily disrupted by necessity. Will there be anything else this evening? He asked. Only the usual tomorrow, Wolfe replied with the satisfaction of a man whose world had returned to its proper rhythm. And Fritz, perhaps you might consider that coconut variation for the mulligatawny. Mr. Thorne's false memory suggests it might be an interesting experiment. Fritz's expression suggested he'd consider no such thing, but he nodded with professional courtesy. The eternal dance. As the brownstone settled into sleep, I reflected on the elegant architecture of Millicent Vance's 30-year strategy. She had created not just evidence, but a mechanism for ensuring that evidence would surface at exactly the right moment, presented to exactly the right person, in exactly the right way to guarantee justice. The witness in the music box had kept its secret through 3 decades of silence, dancing its interrupted waltz while waiting for the proper audience. Now, finally, it had sung its song of truth, and the melody would echo through courtrooms until every note of justice had been properly played. Some dances, it seemed, are worth waiting a lifetime to perform, especially when the final movement brings not just entertainment, but justice, served with the precision that only truth and patience can provide. The case was closed. The music had played, and in the spaces between the notes, 30 years of secrets had finally found their voice, dancing to a tune that would never be forgotten. Outside, New York continued its eternal racket. Inside, Nero Wolfe had returned to his book, Fritz to his kitchen, and I to my typewriter, where I would record this case for posterity. The brownstone had been disturbed, tested, and ultimately vindicated. Order was restored, justice was served, and somewhere in the safe, a mechanical ballerina rested from her long dance of secrets. It was, I reflected as I began typing, exactly the kind of ending that would have made Millicent Vance proud. The witness had finally testified, the truth had finally been heard, and the music, interrupted for 30 years, had finally played its complete and perfect waltz.